For decades, Marlon Brando was known as the ultimate Hollywood rebel, the brooding titan of the screen, whose intense gaze, unpredictable temper, and raw emotional depth redefined acting forever. But behind the fame, behind the awards, and behind the image of the bold romantic heartthrob, Brando carried secrets so deeply buried that even those closest to him never fully understood the man behind the myth. He was a legend who lived life on his own terms, pushing boundaries both professionally and personally. But nothing shook the public more than the revelation that Brando had intimate relationships that the world was never supposed to know about. These were not whispered rumors, not tabloid guesses. These were confessions Brando himself admitted near the end of his life, truths he kept hidden through decades of scrutiny, judgment, and Hollywood pressure. And when he finally revealed the men he had secretly shared romantic relationships with, even his closest friends were stunned. For an era that expected stars to be flawless symbols of traditional masculinity, Brando's truth shattered norms and exposed the emotional complexity beneath his tough exterior. But what led him to finally reveal these names? Why were these relationships hidden so fiercely? And how did these men influence the private battles Brando carried, the loneliness, the turbulence, and the emotional hunger he tried to bury beneath his rebellious image? Today, we explore the truth Brando held onto for decades, and the shocking stories behind the men he loved in secret. Marlon Brando's life was a maze of contradictions, fame and loneliness, brilliance and chaos, tenderness and rage. But if there was one thing he feared more than losing his career, it was the world discovering the parts of himself that he fought tirelessly to hide. Brando grew up in an era where Hollywood expected its male stars to be symbols of perfect masculinity. Studio contracts demanded clean reputations, traditional family images, and carefully constructed illusions that kept audiences believing their heroes lived flawless lives. Anything outside that mold was considered dangerous, even career-ending. Brando understood this pressure from the moment he stepped into Hollywood in the 1950s. His piercing eyes and smoldering presence made him an instant star. But inside, he felt like an outsider, someone who didn't belong in the world people imagined for him. His childhood had been anything but stable. His mother struggled with alcohol, his father rarely showed affection, and emotional safety was something he learned to live without. As an adult, Brando's relationships became complicated webs of longing, conflict, and constant escape. He loved deeply, but feared being truly seen. By the time he reached his later years, the weight of decades spent hiding his truth became unbearable. He no longer cared about Hollywood rules, public judgment, or the defenses he had built around himself. Those who knew him closely said he became more reflective, more honest, and more determined to leave behind the truth rather than the myth the world created for him. And it was during these quiet, introspective years that Brando finally began to reveal the secrets he had guarded all his life. The most shocking revelation was not just that he had relationships with men, but that these relationships were meaningful, filled with passion, trust, and emotional connection that he rarely allowed himself to experience. One of the names he disclosed was a man who had been near him at the height of his fame, when Brando was wrestling with the pressures of success and the chaos of his public image. This man was someone Brando admired for his confidence, someone who understood the loneliness that came with fame. Their relationship was a brief but powerful escape from the expectations that suffocated Brando so deeply. Another man Brando mentioned had come into his life during a quieter chapter, long after the frenzy of his early Hollywood years. This relationship was gentler, more steady, and grounded in mutual respect. Friends noticed Brando seemed more peaceful during this time, though no one could pinpoint why. Now, knowing the truth he later revealed, they understood he had finally found someone who accepted him without judgment, a rare gift in Brando's turbulent world. Brando also revealed a connection with a man he had known through the entertainment industry, someone whose charisma matched his own. Their dynamic was fiery, unpredictable, and intensely emotional. It reflected the restless, rebellious side of Brando that he could never fully tame. They bonded over shared frustrations, late-night conversations, and a mutual desire to break free from the image Hollywood demanded of them. And then there was the fourth man, someone whose name shocked even Brando's closest friends. This was not another actor or performer, but someone from outside the Hollywood bubble. He was grounded, thoughtful, and offered a sense of normalcy Brando rarely experienced. Their relationship opened a part of Brando he had kept locked away, the part that longed for stability, companionship, and a life far removed from cameras and headlines. These four men represented four different sides of Brando's complex emotional world. Each relationship revealed a layer of him that Hollywood never saw: a man who was vulnerable, yearning, and desperate for connection despite the walls he built around himself. For years, these truths remained secret, hidden beneath the legend. But once Brando finally spoke them aloud, everything people thought they knew about him changed forever. When Marlon Brando began opening up about the relationships he had spent decades hiding, he did not do it for shock value, nor was it a confession driven by guilt. It was something deeper, something rooted in the loneliness that had followed him through every stage of his life. Brando often said that the world only ever wanted pieces of him, never the whole person. Fans worshiped the actor, the icon, the rebel, but few ever bothered to understand the human being behind the legend. And that, more than anything, pushed him toward people who saw him without the glare of spotlights. One of the first men Brando spoke about came from a time when he was skyrocketing in fame. Hollywood executives were obsessed with controlling every detail of his public image, even dictating who he could be seen with in public. But this man, someone who worked behind the scenes, saw Brando as more than just a star. They connected quietly, almost cautiously, meeting in private spaces where the pressure of fame couldn't reach them. Their conversations were long and honest, filled with frustrations about life, dreams, and the feeling of being trapped by expectations. Brando later admitted that this man helped him stay grounded at a time when he felt like he was losing himself to the machine of Hollywood. The second man he revealed was part of a chapter. Brando rarely spoke about his life away from the cameras. Those who visited Brando's island in Tahiti said he seemed like an entirely different person there. Calm, barefoot, and free. It was on the island that he formed one of the most meaningful bonds of his life. This man was not from Hollywood, not from fame, and not from a world built on pretending. He came from a humble background and had a gentle wisdom that Brando deeply admired. Their relationship brought Brando a sense of peace he had never found in the city. He described it as a refuge, a place where he could be vulnerable, without fear of judgment or exposure. But perhaps the most surprising name Brando mentioned belonged to someone he had known during one of the most tumultuous periods of his career. The third man was a charismatic performer whose energy matched Brando's own unpredictable spirit. They shared a rebellious streak, often pushing boundaries and challenging the status quo, both in their work and personal lives. Their attraction was electric, filled with intensity and emotional volatility. Friends later admitted they saw flashes of jealousy, passion, and conflict between the two, signs of a relationship that burned bright but could not last. Even years later, Brando spoke of this man with a mix of regret and fondness, acknowledging that they brought out both the best and worst in each other. The fourth man he revealed stunned those who heard it, not because of his identity, but because of what he represented. He was neither a celebrity nor someone connected to Brando's career. He was simply a person who entered Brando's life at the right moment, working in a completely unrelated field. He had no interest in fame and no desire to use Brando's success for personal gain. Their connection formed slowly, built on trust and shared vulnerability. Brando described him as someone who listened without wanting anything in return, something he had rarely experienced. This relationship helped Brando confront parts of himself he had avoided for decades. His fear of abandonment, his longing for emotional safety, and the deep wounds left by a difficult childhood. As Brando opened up about these four men, one theme became clear: these relationships were not fleeting secrets or scandals. They were profound emotional connections that shaped his life in ways few ever realized. Brando was known for his intensity, and that intensity carried into his personal relationships. He loved fiercely, argued passionately, and felt everything at a depth that most people couldn't comprehend. But because he feared vulnerability, he often hid those feelings behind humor, defiance, or anger. What made these relationships different was the safety he felt with these men. They allowed him to be human, to express weakness, confusion, tenderness, and fear. They were people who saw beyond the myth of Marlon Brando and embraced the flawed, sensitive soul underneath. Hollywood tried to mold him into a symbol of untouchable masculinity. But the simplicity. The island represented freedom, and the man he met there symbolized everything Brando never found in Hollywood: humility, peace, and an unshakable sense of belonging. Their relationship was built on shared sunsets, long walks along the shore, and hours of conversation under the stars. It wasn't about passion or drama. It was about healing. Brando often described him as a gentle presence, someone who brought calm into a life dominated by emotional storms. Even after the relationship shifted and eventually faded, the impact lingered. Brando carried the island man's influence with him for the rest of his life, turning Tahiti into a permanent refuge where he could retreat whenever fame became unbearable. The third relationship carried a different energy entirely: fire, excitement, and a dangerous intensity. This charismatic performer shared Brando's rebellious spirit, and their chemistry was undeniable. But with that chemistry came volatility. They clashed often, their personalities too similar and too wild to coexist peacefully for long. Friends recalled seeing them argue passionately one moment and laugh together the next, as if they were experiencing every emotion at double speed. Brando would later say that this relationship taught him the risks of loving someone who mirrored your own storm. It was thrilling, addictive, and ultimately unsustainable. Yet, when he spoke of this man decades later, his voice softened, suggesting that he still cherished the memories despite the turbulent moments. But the fourth man, the one who entered Brando's life unexpectedly, became the quiet revelation that tied everything together. This man didn't come from fame or glamour. He wasn't impressed by Brando's celebrity status. Instead, he valued honesty, privacy, and emotional depth. Their connection wasn't immediate. It grew gradually through conversations that began casually and deepened with time. Brando found himself opening up about his fears, regrets, and childhood wounds, things he rarely admitted even to himself. What made this relationship extraordinary was its gentleness. There were no games, no jealousy, no power struggles. Just two men building trust one moment at a time. Brando often said that this was the relationship that taught him the difference between being desired and being truly seen. All his life, people chased him for roles, headlines, or fantasies they projected onto him. But this man cared about the human being, not the movie star. Their bond helped Brando confront the deepest parts of his identity and accept that love could take many forms, none of which needed to be explained or justified. In later years, when Brando quietly revealed these for relationships, he did so with a sense of peace rather than shame. He wasn't looking for attention or validation. He simply wanted the truth to exist somewhere beyond his own memories. For decades, people tried to claim ownership over his story, twisting rumors into headlines and crafting narratives that fit Hollywood's expectations. By sharing these secrets, Brando reclaimed that story for himself. These relationships did not define him, but they completed him. They revealed the layers beneath the legend, the vulnerability, the longing, the craving for connection that fame could never satisfy. And for the first time, the world began to understand that Marlon Brando's life was not just about movies, scandals, or fame. It was about a man searching tirelessly for someone who truly saw him. As Marlon Brando entered the later years of his life, the weight of everything he had kept hidden began to press more heavily on him. He had spent decades wrapped in myth, surrounded by people who adored the legend, but rarely understood the man. Fame had made him larger than life, yet his heart held secrets that made him feel remarkably small. When he finally revealed the truth about the man he had loved, he wasn't trying to make headlines. He was trying to free himself from the silence that had shaped so much of his journey. The world reacted with shock, curiosity, and disbelief. Some fans felt as if they were hearing about a different person entirely, while others admired his honesty. But what most people never fully realized was how much pain Brando had carried. While hiding these relationships, he lived in a time when admitting such feelings could destroy a career, derail friendships, or invite relentless public scrutiny. To protect the people he cared for and himself, he chose secrecy. But secrecy always comes with a cost. and Brando paid that cost in isolation. The first relationship he revealed, the one formed during his explosive rise to fame, was the beginning of Brando's struggle with emotional double lives. The pressure of Hollywood forced him to present himself one way in public, while living another reality behind closed doors. This man had seen Brando at his most vulnerable, offering the actor a rare sense of security. But the secrecy surrounding their connection meant it could never fully grow into the kind of companionship Brando longed for. Looking back, he admitted that losing that bond left a lasting ache, a reminder of a love he was never allowed to fully experience. The second relationship, the one born in the quiet beauty of Tahiti, brought him peace, but also heartbreak. For a time, Brando believed he had found his true home not just in the island's gentle rhythm, but in the man who treated him with kindness and sincerity. Their love was uncomplicated, untouched by fame, and rooted in empathy. But as Brando's responsibilities and inner turmoil grew, he found himself slipping away from the simplicity he had cherished. Even after the relationship ended, he returned to Tahiti again and again, searching for the calm he once felt beside that man. He knew the relationship was a chapter he couldn't reopen, yet it haunted him with the question of what might have been if he had chosen a quieter life. His third relationship remained the most intense and the most painful. This man, charismatic and fiery, matched Brando's passion in ways that both thrilled and overwhelmed him. They challenged each other constantly, pushing boundaries and testing limits, creating a connection that was as volatile as it was magnetic. Their love was powerful but unstable, filled with arguments that erupted as quickly as their laughter. Brando later admitted that he loved this man deeply, but feared the intensity of what they shared. In the end, he stepped away not because the love faded, but because the chaos became too heavy to carry. It was a decision he regretted for years, one he spoke of with lingering tenderness. The fourth man, the quiet, steady presence he met later in life, was ultimately the one who brought Brando the clarity he had been searching for. This relationship was built on trust, patience, and honesty, qualities Brando had rarely encountered in Hollywood. This man did not care about Brando's fame or legacy. He cared about his loneliness, his fears, his dreams, and the emotional wounds he had carried since childhood. Through this bond, Brando learned to forgive himself for the mistakes he had made and the lives he had touched and hurt along the way. It was the first time he felt truly safe in love, without fear of judgment or loss. When Brando finally shared these secrets, he did so with a voice softened by age and experience. He knew people would speculate, criticize, or sensationalize his words, but he no longer cared. He wanted the world to understand one thing: he had been human. He had loved deeply, mourned quietly, and spent years yearning for a connection that fame could never give him. In the end, the revelations were not about scandal but about truth. Brando hoped that by speaking openly, he could help others trapped by silence, fear, or expectations to live more authentically. His legacy, he insisted, was not just in the films he made or the characters he portrayed, it was in the honesty he finally allowed himself to express. The world had always seen Marlon Brando as a legend, but through these revelations, they finally saw the man, a man shaped by love, haunted by secrecy, and ultimately defined by the courage to tell his story before time ran out.